just admit that some of y'all wanted to hate this movie before it even came out. The internet is so dramatic sometimes. Hey Twisted people, it's your Twisted Girl here, Chauncey K. Robinson, and today I am doing a spoiler-free review of The Exorcist Believer. When his young daughter Angela and her friend Catherine show signs of demonic possession, it unleashes a chain of events that forces single father Victor Fielding to confront the face of evil. Terrified and desperate, he seeks out Chris McNeil, the only person alive who's witnessed anything like it before. It may lack the raw cinematic flair of the original, but The Exorcist Believer has a very intriguing story and really solid, terrifying moments throughout. Let's just address the elephant in the room. When the trailer for this movie came out, there were, well, because it's the internet, if you pay attention to the internet, there were a lot of people who just was like, why? Why do we have this film? Oh my gosh. And you know, it goes back into the whole idea of nostalgia. Some people are okay with remakes and continuations. Other people are just kind of like, create a new franchise. Other people are like, why not just continue the franchise? And I think some of the loudest voices for The Exorcist Believer were probably of the school of thought that we did not need a continuation. And so they were ready to, I think, dislike this film, or at least hold it to such a pedestal because of the nostalgia of the original, of The Exorcist, that it just already was going to be faulted for any kind of less than perfect aspects of itself. Now, to be clear, The Exorcist Believer, we are being told that this is the official sequel to The Exorcist, right? So that means that The Exorcist 2 and The Exorcist 3 are no longer considered canon. And oh my gosh, the internet went wild. Some people were suddenly claiming that part 3 was a masterpiece, just like part 1, and how dare you no longer consider that canon, which is crazy to me because I can honestly say I don't think I've ever heard anyone before this movie came out trying to claim that 2 or 3 were all that good. Honestly, the consensus I always heard was that 2 and 3 weren't very good and that they should have just left it at 1. So it was news to me hearing people say that 3 was like on par with 1 simply because the original writer came back for the third one, and that, you know, this was blasphemy to not include it in the sequels. But, you know, honestly, we've been here before, right? So let's get into some of the pros of this film, because there are actually good things about this film. There is some solid, good storytelling here. I think what you have is a raising of the stakes. It's not just one possessed girl, it's 2 possessed girls. And I know some people felt like that was gimmicky, but I actually think it works really well for the way this story plays out and the stakes that are there for the storytelling. Also, I think it's because it allows you to have a little bit of an expansion of the lore, which totally happens here, which is another quality aspect of this, because a lot of times when it comes to not just The Exorcist, but all the movies, possession movies after it that played into the idea of demonic possession, even though The Exorcist was a trailblazer in tapping into that, it's usually very much focused in on Catholicism, on the Catholic Church, as though, you know, no other cultures have dealt with or have a way of dealing with demonic possession. But if we read books, we know that that is not the case. And I feel like the movie decided to expand on that. So we got an introduction and an intermingling of different spiritualities and religions, which I thought was super cool. You had, Christianity, aka, like Baptists in there. Of course, you had Catholic in there, but it wasn't the centerpiece. Catholicism wasn't necessarily the centerpiece in the film, which I think is a different kind of path. And you also had hoodoo. Hoodoo. You do? Hoodoo. Yes. And I've seen some people mistakenly call it voodoo, and it's not, because it's not the same, right? A little history course here. Hoodoo is really a craft of, magic and whatnot, and spirituality that is based in America, actually, and comes from Black Americans, while voodoo, of course, is not. So it was very cool to see that. And I think if you're someone who's interested in that, just like I'm interested in like theology and the lore of Catholicism and other spiritualities and stuff, this adds to that. And I think it did it in a really cool way of having it overlap to save the two, or to try to save the two young girls. A drawback of the film is that, yes, there are a lot of characters here. And because of the fact that, or I want to say that there's more characters in the original, right? In the original one, it was a very, packed cast in the sense of a small cluster of people to deal with. In The Exorcist Believer, it's a bit wide. And so at times I can feel like that I could see why people would feel like it feels like kind of chaotic, and that it feels a little bit like a lot is going on, as opposed to really being able to settle into the story, because there are a lot of moving parts. And that's probably because there's two young girls possessed and there's two different families. Although I think it becomes very clear within probably the first 20 or 30 minutes of the film who are the actual focus. And that's probably for the best, because although there are a lot of characters, not all of the characters are actually fleshed out. There's really about 2 to 4 characters that are probably the most fleshed out and the most in terms of getting focus, that you should probably zone in on in terms of understanding the journey that's happening on screen. Yes, it does take a little while to get started, but so did the original. I mean, you kind of have to set the tone, because just like in the original one, you had to know who Regan was, this wonderfully vibrant young girl and her life and her issues and things like that. So when the possession takes course, it's such a drastic change that in and of itself is so chilling. Not just the makeup, not just the change in the face, but the change of this character you got to know in the beginning. So I think the film does a well enough job in doing that. The actual exorcism itself, without going into a lot of detail, is so well done, and it's so intriguing and so different than what we've seen in previous films. Let's be honest, after The Exorcist, there were a lot of films after it that did a lot of the same things, tried to be different, but kind of played on the same tropes. And I feel, once again, bringing in the idea of expanding the lore, not just sticking to Catholicism, that it really allowed itself to put a different, I don't want to say different spin on exorcism, but very much incorporating something that we have not usually seen in general films about the topic. And I thought that was really interesting in seeing the lore of these different spiritualities coming together, trying to save the girls. The actual things that were happening throughout, there were a lot of brutal and raw moments. And it was so great because you had this buildup. And although things started happening kind of, quickly, when you get to this moment with them, it's intense. And I can honestly say I felt like this was really well done and raised the stakes, and just how they arranged it and how you see it on screen, I thought it was very effective. And really what sells this is, at the heart of the film, it's about a single father and his daughter and the layers of that. Just like in the original film, it was about a single mother and her daughter, and that connection that they have, that closeness, despite, there being some, issues here and there of drama. And so I think that shows through enough that if you can focus in on that aspect of the story, aside from some of the other supporting characters they throw at you in the film, then you can really feel connected to the story. My overall grade for The Exorcist Believer is a solid B. It made me a believer. I think that this is a solid addition, and I do recommend it. Okay, Twisted family, that is my spoiler-free review of The Exorcist Believer. Let me know if you're planning on seeing The Exorcist Believer, or if you've already seen it, let me know your thoughts. Do you think the internet was already trying to hate on this film to the point where they weren't trying to give it a chance? Let me know. Comment down below. And as always, keep it creepy out there. Thanks for watching.